Yeah, it says it's live.
Thank you. Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Health Overview and Scrutiny Panel. I'm Councillor Ian Holder, Chair of the Health Overview and Scrutiny Panel. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting online. Those present are requested to keep the microphones on mute and only to turn them on when you are called to speak. Members are requested to keep your cameras turned on at all times. Officers and external presenters are requested to turn your cameras on only when you're presenting reports or answering questions. Members will read the reports, so presenters, please just highlight any developments that have occurred since publication. If you'd like to speak, please write your name and RTS request to speak in the chat function or raise your hand. I'd now like to invite those present to introduce themselves. Councillor Atkins, is he here yet? No. Councillor Heaney?
Councillor Graham Heaney, Leather Council for St Jude Ward in Portsmouth.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
Hello, I'm Mark Jeffrey, Sir Thomas Ward, Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. Councillor Madrick? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry?
You're on mute to start with.
Oh, sorry. I'm okay now, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Brian Madrick, Portsmouth Independents, Paulsgrove Ward, Opposition Spokesman.
Thank you. Councillor Agate?
Thank you, Chairman. Arthur Agate, I'm East Hants District Council's representative on this panel.
Thank you. Councillor Briggs?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anne Briggs, County Councillor for Waterloo and North Stakes and Vice Chair of the Hampshire HOSP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Burton?
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Joanne Burton, representing Fareham Borough Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Pepper?
Martin Pepper, Gosport Borough Council.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Abdul Kadir, Councillor Michael Reid and Councillor Julie Richardson. Right. Has anyone got any declarations of interest relating to any of the items on the agenda today? No. Perfect. Minutes of the previous meeting. I've got a proposer and a seconder to agree the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Agate, anyone? And Councillor Jeffrey. Thank you. Those are agreed. Right, we've got a slight change today. We've had requests for a couple of deputations from two of the Portsmouth City councillors, Councillor Cal Corkery and Councillor Kirsty Mellor. They've asked to make deputations on agenda item 6. So they've got a maximum of 6 minutes each. Once those 6 minutes are up, I'll ask you, you can stay, but you won't be able to talk to Jo when she does her presentation or question her. That's for members of HOSP. So you can stay or you can go, and anything that you do bring up, we'll get Jo to address next time she's here, or she can contact you afterwards. So we will go to those deputations. I don't know who wants to go first. Kirsty or Cal? Kirsty, do you want to go first? Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name's Kirsty. I'm an independent councillor for Charles Dickens Ward in Portsmouth. Thank you, Ian, for allowing us to come along and give deputations for agenda item number 6. It's something that Councillor Corkery and I are very, very passionate about, and we've been supporting residents in our ward with this issue for some time now. If you just bear with me just while I get up my deputation. So I looked back through my emails yesterday evening to find out how long we've been supporting residents to gain access to the John Pounds Medical Centre, and I was really disappointed to see that the first meeting I attended was in June 2021, and here we are nearly 2 years later and no better off. I'm quite frustrated by this, so heaven only knows how our residents feel who have got to battle daily to see their GP. The Portsea community fought hard to have a GP practice in their neighbourhood, yet now they can only see a GP if they travel to Lake Road Health Centre, and that's not accessible to many of our residents. We've petitioned the council to take action. Residents have stood in full council sharing their concerns. And in December 2022, the full council debated the petition to reinstate GPs at the John Pounds Medical Centre. And there was over 500 people that signed that petition. The petition actually read, "We, the undersigned, petition the council to support Portsea Action Group and the local community to get GPs reinstated at the John Pounds Medical Centre and help resolve the barriers and blockages that is preventing this from happening." To conclude that debate, and in response to the petition, Councillor Winnington and Councillor Fazal-Zakari stated that on behalf of Portsmouth City Council, the Liberal Democrat administration accepts the petition raised, supports the campaign to restore full GP services to the surgery at John Pounds Centre, and thanks Portsea Action Group for their hard work. But despite all the assurances made by the administration, we've got a report before us today that tells us what council officers promised the residents 2 years ago. But unfortunately, it doesn't mention restoring full GP services to the John Pounds Centre. And I think this does need to be a little bit better. We know that general practice provision rooted in communities such as Portsea has a crucial role in identifying the individual and local outcomes of illness. Councillor Corky and I share the residents' concerns about missed opportunities in dealing with health inequality that often goes hand in hand with socially deprived communities. And general practice has a crucial role in improving our residents' health. And also as well, I wanted to say that investing in primary care services will provide better health outcomes for local authorities and the NHS in the long term. So we are asking that the GP practice is back to full service as soon as possible, so our residents get the best health outcomes and the assistance they need from the healthcare providers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Cal, would you like to do your deputation now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to echo, I think, a lot of what Kirsty said. This is a really strongly felt issue in the Portsea part of our ward. And for those that kind of don't know Portsmouth too well, Portsea is an inner city, primarily social housing estate around the dockyard, not far from the city centre. It's a place where there are significant social issues and significant health needs, and lots of people who do need to access healthcare on a regular basis, and lots of people who we've spoken to over the years who've had real issues with that. And a large part, they put that down to the lack of a GP presence within their community. Going back a number of years in the lead up to the GP practice being built there, the community were actively involved in the funds being raised and had decided about how they would be spent. And a key kind of requirement that came from the residents was to be able to access healthcare services within their community. We've already seen the dentist practice close at the John Pounds Centre a few years ago and not be replaced in that community. Now we've got a GP, perfectly good as far as we're aware, GP practice sat there just with no GPs in it, and people are being redirected to other parts of the city to try and access those services. I appreciate the report talks about a consultation exercise to try and better understand the health needs of that community, which of course is something that we would kind of fully support and be keen to engage in and ensure that residents are able to engage in that process. But not to spoil the kind of outcome of that report, I can tell you that if you consult the people in Portsea, what they will tell you is they won't to access GP services out of the John Pounds Centre where they've previously been able to. I know also the report doesn't really kind of make too much reference to the provision of GP services. It's more about understanding where needs are. And we, of course, appreciate that actually not everyone who says they need to access a GP necessarily does need to access a GP, and that those kind of services are changing, and it may well be that people can be kind of directed to other forms of support. And of course, we understand and support that. But there are lots of people who do need to see a GP, and the people we speak to are kind of ringing up, being told they need to see a GP, and then struggling to do that, or being directed to other parts of the city which aren't accessible to them, and then having to fork out money on taxis or buses in order to get there. I have to say, and this isn't exclusively an NHS issue. This is something that the NHS have also been involved in. Portsmouth City Council, as the owner of the building, and also the practice. And I think we, and certainly the community, have found that dynamic pretty frustrating over the last couple of years, because not everyone is always saying the same thing, and it seems to me it's always someone else's problem. So I think what we're really asking for, and what we have been asking for throughout, is just those kind of three parties to really do as much as they possibly can. I know there have been lots of efforts so far, but just to ensure that everyone's working together and working towards that same goal of restoring services that the residents need. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there doesn't really appear to be a good reason why there aren't GPs operating out of the John Pound Centre as we speak. We've heard quite a lot of bad reasons. We've heard discussions about the lease, which have been ongoing for years. I know leases can take a while to deal with, but in the meantime, people aren't able to access those GP services. So I would hope that wherever those blockages are, they can be kind of streamlined and some kind of agreement made, so that we can kind of fast track the reintroduction of GPs there. We've also heard at one point we were told there were issues with the lift, which were holding things up, which when we fed that back to residents, they found quite incredible, because GP services have always been provided on the ground floor of that building. And as far as we're concerned, there are always plans to be provided on the ground floor in future should they go back. So quite why a lift would be holding up that reintroduction, we don't know. And then we're also told there's been a big hold up with dilapidations negotiations around the old lease, which again, that may be something that officials and surveyors and lawyers need to argue about behind the scenes, but we just don't see why that should hold up the provision of frontline services in the meantime. So as I say, we just wanted to take this opportunity to come along and kind of really press the issue as we've done before, because when we go around Portsea and speak to the residents, as of course we do as our ward councillor duties, one of the primary issues, top three every single time, is when are we getting the GP services back at John Pound Centre? Why have they gone? These are the issues that it's causing us. So yeah, thank you for giving us the opportunity. As I say, I guess our really key ask is just to ensure that everyone is working together around that key goal of reintroducing GP services back into that community and ensuring that everyone that needs healthcare services is able to access them. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal. Thank you, Kirsty. Joe, I'll give you a chance to sort of respond to that later when we get to agenda item 6. So we've got
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to agenda item 4, Southern Health. Nikki Creighton-Young can't be here today, so Dr. Riaz Daramishi, sorry if I've got that wrong, is going to speak to us on her behalf.
Hello, thanks for having me, and sorry Nikki can't be here. I haven't been to this meeting before, so if I'm doing something wrong, just stop me and put me on the right track. But I'll just summarise briefly what the headlines from the report that you should have already had the opportunity to see. Just to give you a bit of background, I'm Dr. Riaz Daramishi. I'm a consultant geriatrician by trade. I'm also the clinical director for the South East Division at Southern Health and the Deputy Chief Medical Officer for Physical Health for the whole trust. The trust-wide headlines that I'd like to emphasise for you today are that obviously there's the Fusion programme ongoing, which will bring together Solent, Southern, Isle of Wight and Sussex CAMS services. There's work going on 2 levels around this. At the top of that work stream is the high level strategic business case, which was I was prepared to say was being worked through, but I've just heard today has been signed off by the respective boards of Southern and Solent, and will now go to NHS England for scrutiny there. The overall trajectory is to aim for a new organisation in April of 24. But in the meantime, there's a lot of work going on at a local level between teams to start the process of cultural and service merger. And I think we need to recognise in a process like this, the streamlining of the delivery of clinical services is a much more successful when there's streamlining of the varied cultures that exist between organisations, because clinical care at its heart is about the collaboration of individual people, and that's something that we're attending to as we go along, while the mechanics of the process are attended to by the executive. The PASCO report is still a live and ongoing issue for us, but we're pleased with our most recent progress on this. And at 32% of those actions from the PASCO report are fully completed, and the remaining 68% are on track. And I think what's important to reference with that is these are issues which are never, in a sense, done, because they require ongoing monitoring, and the monitoring of our compliance with those issues will now be kind of part of our business as usual. I think the other thing that's very salient at the moment is the emergence of industrial action. There's been the junior doctor strike this week, which for us at Southern Health has only had a minimal impact. Within South East Hampshire, we've been relatively unscathed in that we only had to reschedule one clinic within our services, and those patients have been reaccommodated in good time. There was also the Royal College of Nurses strike in January, which involved two of our sites at the Western and Gosport War Memorial. I think that feeds into a broader issue we're aware of, which is around the resilience and the retention of our workforce. And we have a new program which we're calling the ABC Clinical Commitment, which is about supporting staff in their work to show autonomy, to understand that they belong to an organisation that values their input and that they're able to contribute effectively to the care of patients. And I think this is, if I can use the slightly funky shorthand of saying, this is about empowering staff to be able to influence their work around the needs of the patients that they identify, and for us to be able to understand what they need in terms of their support to deliver that work most effectively. And that's something that we're very proud of. Within South East Hampshire more specifically, since August of last year, but on a path of accelerating development, we've done a lot of work with our urgent community response and our virtual ward. Now, this is work that's aimed primarily about supporting mainly older people and those with frailty undergoing a crisis at home, which previously may well have meant they ended up going to hospital, but which could be supported in the community if we were organised in the correct fashion. That's work now we've been doing for some months. When their support requires more than one visit or assessment, they go on to our local virtual ward, which I'm actually clinically involved with and do an MDT for every morning. And that allows us to support and monitor patients' progress while they go through this crisis, ensure that they've had appropriate clinical action, and that they are recovering. That leads us to support patients effectively at home, when they previously would have gone to QA hospital. We run the urgent treatment centre at Petersfield, and I think it's worth noting that in December of this year, they were particularly challenged when there was a rise in prevalence of strep A. Our performance at the urgent treatment centre is generally very good, but that month we have to acknowledge that waits were longer than normal. But I think that's given a context which allows for understanding when we note that in December of 22 we saw over 3,000 patients in the urgent treatment centre in Petersfield, compared with 2,200 the month before and 1,500 the year before. So we're really proud of the work that they put in, and waiting times have returned to normal in the subsequent months. Within our community hospitals at Gosport and Petersfield, we've been running a number of additional step-up beds to support flow out of acute hospitals, and these will continue till the end of this March. We've had 15% increase in admission and discharges through our community hospital beds, and in recent months we've increased the therapy input to allow for 7-day therapy input and assessment of our patients, to ensure that everyone who's transferred to a community hospital has an assessment within their first 24 hours. An ongoing piece of work for us at the moment in South East Hampshire is with our crisis team, which is undergoing some service development work. This is about allowing the team to perform more ably and more effectively to support patients going through mental health crisis in their own homes. Often these problems manifest with demand for inpatient beds, but actually that demand should be understood as a function of how we manage people with severe mental illness throughout their recovery and in their relapses as well. And the crisis team is a key part of that, which will be getting increased focus over the coming weeks and months. We've also launched the future planning template, which is one cog in a much larger programme of work that comes under the label now of proactive case management. And this encapsulates the idea that for patients, older patients, particularly those with frailty, we can anticipate that they will have a crisis. We won't necessarily know when it's going to happen. But if we start planning care ahead for these people, then it's much easier to do for them the things that they need in order to keep them well managed in their own homes and avoid them going into hospital when it's not in their best interests. Over time within community services, we get to know our patients very well, and using something like the future planning template, which will be shared with neighbouring providers, we can capture what we've learned about their care, their treatment, and what works for them, and how we should consider future clinical decision making for them in a way that allows it to be accessed when their needs become much more heightened. That was a whistle-stop tour. I hope that was sufficient. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Heaney.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to get some clarification on the paragraph around bed management and flow, because I have to say I got a bit confused. It talks about the number of physical health surge beds being increased in November from 6 to a total of 88, which I understand. Then it talks about that continuing till March. Then it talks about the occupancy across our wards in December was 160 occupied bed days. Now, bed days and beds, obviously, it's the relationship between these I don't quite understand. So what is a bed day and what is a bed? So how many of those beds were actually occupied during December? And it talks about the lowest occupancy, 148, and then going up to 162. So I wanted to get a sense of how much they were occupied. And I couldn't really get it from those figures because I don't quite know what a bed day is.
Yeah, a bed day is just a day when a bed is being used. What it tries to encapsulate is the turnover of patients through those beds across our bed base. Our occupancy rates over the last few months have been in excess of 90% at all times. It's generally felt that the ideal bed occupancy rate you should run is 85%, so you always have capacity to admit. But with recent demands, we've been running higher than that.
So roughly how many days were those 88 beds occupied for in, say, December? Was it all
roughly all of them?
Every single day, right? Yeah, and then it went down slightly in January. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's explained. That's clear now.
Thank you, Councillor Agate.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the Petersfield UTC, which is sort of in my area, I understand that during the last year they've their equipment's been upgraded and more services have been added. Hopefully that's going to continue?
So the plans for the UTC are that it delivers a service that local patients value, and we can see that through increasing usage of it. There isn't planned for any additional functional service to be provided from the UTC. So I'm not sure I want to raise your expectations to that end.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chairman. On the crisis resolution and treatment teams, you say Portsmouth and South East Hampshire. How far, because Southern Health and what you're calling fusion is meant to be for all of Hampshire, how far will that be rolled out? Because it is an excellent thing to do to try and keep people at home and look after them in their home. But I'm always afraid with this big merger that half of Hampshire is going to be left out.
So the crisis team that I refer to isn't something that's new. It is a team that is not performing as effectively as it might be. The rest of Hampshire has crisis teams that cover them. We are doing a particular piece of work to enhance the capability of the team we already have. In terms of the fusion work concern that you have you've raised, the way we're approaching that work is that we're fusing. I mean, we've steered away from the use of the word merger, where the organizations are coming together to form a single new organization. And in the initial stages, at least, there will be no direct change to service provision. What we're looking to do as a result of the fusion program is take the best aspects of care models in the existing organizations and replicate that learning in other areas. So there isn't an area that is now not served by a crisis team, but as a result of the fusion program, what we're hoping is we'll be able to take examples of best practice from across Hampshire and replicate those in all of the areas. And that I think is one of the perceived benefits of the whole fusion program, that it allows for the easier sharing of good practice and the easier dissemination of the fundamentals to implementing that in other areas.
Okay, thank you. But my other concern is CAMS, which I think Wessex Trust provides. That's not working. How are you going to improve that for our young people? We've got so many children waiting.
So CAMS is something that I am not currently involved with. It is not does not fall under my purview. So I would be busking if I gave you an answer to that question today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I've got one. You mentioned it in the CRHT team. It mentions the team is currently being supported whilst it's undergoing quality improvement work. What triggered that? Is that as something standard, or is it something specific that requires improvement?
So we've had a lot of focus in the last year and a half, 2 years on the operational function of our inpatient unit at Elmley. We experienced in South East Hampshire fairly high demands for inpatient admission for adults with mental health problems. And what we've come to understand from that is that it would be a mistake to interpret high demand for beds and difficulty accessing beds purely as a function of the inpatient unit itself. How the inpatient unit functions best needs to be understood in how it interacts with the crisis team and how the crisis team interacts with routine care from CMHTs. So as a result of the focus on inpatient care, we've come to the understanding that there's a significant opportunity to improve the crisis management of patients in the community when they first present. And we think that there's the opportunity to manage patients appropriately in the community in the initial stages at least, and in some cases prevent them needing an inpatient bed at all. So it's a tendril that's grown out of focus elsewhere.
Thank you. So no more questions? I know you have to shoot off in a minute, Dr. Duramshi, but thank you for.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Right. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 5, Portsmouth Hospitals University NHS Trust.
Chair, can I interrupt there for a minute? I understand that Dr. Duramshi had to leave, but we had a deputation from 2 members, and I just wondered if we ought to consider taking the item they come to hear about.
That's mainly for agenda item 6. So that's Joe.
I know, but wouldn't it be? Should we consider maybe bringing it forward so that the members can hear it and then they can leave if they have other matters to deal with?
Joe, are you okay coming forward? Penny, are you okay delaying slightly?
I'm happy to carry forward if Penny's happy to wait.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, over to you then, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. So if I comment in relation to the deputation from Councillor Mellor and Councillor Cokery, and firstly, I think to say I acknowledge their frustration and the frustration of the residents of Portsea, and I apologise for the delay that all of this has taken, as both Councillor Cokery and Councillor Mellor have have raised and explained, some of the rationale or the rationale for this, the delay and the lack of GP presence at the John Pounds surgery has been in relation to the lease conversations, lease negotiations between Portsmouth City Council and the practice that provides services in the John Pounds. And this was it's been quite a complicated lease negotiations in that the property was originally, the lease was originally held by, so the property is owned by Portsmouth City Council. The original lease was between Portsmouth City Council and NHS Property Services, and then a subcontract lease between the NHS Property Services and what was at the time the Lake Road practice, who provide services at the John Pounds site. That practice has now merged with another practice and is known as the Island City practice. So that's the group of practice that own that run the services from the John Pounds services. So a decision was made some time ago that actually that three-way lease discussion wasn't particularly helpful, and that there would be a direct lease between the Portsmouth City Council and the practice. I think, and some of that getting out of the old lease and getting into a new lease has created some of the challenges, and that's certainly some of the issue around dilapidations and the issues regards to the lift, which has been out of action for some time. So there have been ongoing discussions between those three parties around that. I think that the practice has been reluctant to extend and offer services from the John Pounds Centre without that lease security of the lease, and they were also looking to take on a greater share of the building than they had originally. So that's the background. As I say, I can only apologise, and I share to some extent councillors' frustrations and the residents' frustrations that we haven't been able to move this forward quickly, or that actually we've allowed this lease issue to overshadow the provision of care and support from the site. So whilst people were talking, I've emailed so that we're going to meet again with the City Council and my team that support the practice to look at where we're at with the lease negotiation, to understand what more we can do, and to work much more closely with the practice to see if we can get services from that site. I think that's one issue. The other challenge, of course, is that, as we know, primary care has changed quite considerably since the pandemic. We have real capacity issues around particularly GP provision in Portsmouth, as you will be aware. So the work that we've referenced in item 6, it has been about how do we get a better understanding of that? How can we support those residents differently, recognising, I think, that we may not be able to provide a full-time GP service from that site, but how do we make sure that we have some, access? What could that look like? What is the plan for getting them back there? And how do we support residents in accessing services in different ways? So that's the work that we've referenced in the letter to HOSP. That's the work we're committed to, but I fully accept that we've all allowed the lease negotiations to kind of detract us from, the main issue, which is getting the right provision of healthcare, primary healthcare for the residents of Portsea. So we will look at that, and I'm very happy to come back with a full account of where we've got to, either at the next HOSP or to meet with Councillors Mellor and Councillor Cokery again in between, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Jo. That'd be good. Would you like to address the rest of the report?
Yeah, do you want me to continue, or did you want to bring...
No, you may as well continue.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So, as I say, Dr. Tanesh Riaz from Southern has talked to you about Project Fusion, which is at sort of the start of my report. That was the ICB has worked very closely with community mental health partners to secure that review, and really pleased to see the work that's continued from that with with all of the providers. As well as that, there's been a lot of work going on around the development of the ICS strategy and the Integrated Care Partnership strategy. Councillor Winnington and Director of Public Health for Portsmouth are very involved in that, as are, I'm sure, local authority members in other parts of the patch. But this gives you a good, hopefully, understanding of the interim IC Integrated Partnership strategy, and the Integrated Partnership Board is just being established. That's different, obviously, from the Integrated Care Board, which is the NHS part of the wider ICS. And we've talked about that before, but happy to go through it if helpful. As you know, and as we've referenced, we do have significant issues in relation to GP access in the city. That is a national issue, but as you're aware, we were mentioned in a report back in May last year as being one of the lowest doctored areas. So we've really welcomed the support from Portsmouth City Council and other stakeholders in how we can resolve some of those issues, and work ongoing, particularly with the Hospital Trust, around looking at how we might attract more GPs into the area, and also looking at how that we can learn from what the Hospitals Trust has done around international recruitment. So a lot of work ongoing off the back of the GP Summit that was held in January. North Harbour, the closure and transfer of patients from North Harbour Medical Group has been something that we've been particularly occupied with over the last few months. We have all of the patients have now been transferred to other practices in the city. The majority of those practices have been have been transferred between Portsdown Group Practice and Drayton Practice. We've worked really closely with both practices and and the patients at North Harbour to try and secure a successful transfer. That feels like it's gone well, but obviously we're continuing to work with those practices to understand that, and to understand any issues, and also to look at and make sure that the work that they did and the support they received in being able to receive additional patients has continued, and that we haven't created any issues or any further issues around access for those two practices. So we're continuing to work very closely with them. They're probably the key things I wanted to raise from the report, unless there are specific questions that people have at all.
Thank you, Jo. Councillor Heaney, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What if I just start with the John Pounds issue, because obviously that was our reputation. I mean, I heard what Councillor Miller and Councillor Hawkins said about that. There's obviously a fairly high level of frustration about the delays. You've outlined a process here which involves a lot of community involvement, community consultation, which is fine, and there's quite a lot of detail here in the letter about what's going to be done. I suppose the only concern is that if you go back to residents and say we're going to consult again, there'll be a level of sort of sighing, saying, they're going to consult us again about what they're doing, and then they're not going to do what they say. So there could be some cynicism about this consultation if you don't handle it right. I mean, clearly I understand what you're saying about how COVID has changed and things could be different, but I'm sure you have done community consultation before in this area. I mean, some of it may be out of date and may need updating, but I think the way this consultation is done has got to be handled pretty carefully in order to get a good response and to encourage people to think that it's actually genuine and something positive is going to come out of it. It's not just going to be something that they feel they won't really have any influence over, which I think is the danger.
Yeah, I completely agree, Councillor Heaney. I think, and you're right, we do have to be really careful about handling that, and we don't want it to be a piece of work that plays lip service to it, if that's what you mean. I think we want to get underneath some of that and but also be really honest with people around what we can achieve and what we can't, but also to think differently around that. And we're looking for the help within that. So we've been working very closely with Portsmouth City Council to do that. As you know, we have an integrated communications and engagement team, and we're working with public health colleagues and the community champions around that to look at that aspect of health promotion as well. We're also working closely with Hive Portsmouth. So the idea is that this is it gives weight to the argument around what services people think they need and feel they need, but also helps us to work in a more co-production way with that community about what we can deliver locally down there. That's the aim. So
I did have a couple more questions on some other issues. Would you be happy for me to go ahead, or do you want to let someone else come in first?
Carry on.
I wanted to ask about you talked about the North Harbour Medical Group closing, and then there's a comment underneath that paragraph saying exploring the possibility of building a new GP practice premises on the Highclere site by Treetops in Cosham. So who would actually build this, and who would staff it?
Yes, so this is an issue, and it has been raised before. So we were in conversations with the practice with North Harbour Medical Group prior to them issuing the notice to cease providing services there about a new premises, because as you know, you'll all be aware, in the city the Cosham Health Centre has not really been fit for purpose for quite some time. So there were some real concerns from everybody about the state of that building. We had developed and again, how complicated can some of these things be is always the question. So we had developed a business case within Portsmouth Clinical Commissioning Group, and we'd worked on that with partners in Solent, who will be the sort of the lead and the owner of that building, because at that time clinical commissioning groups weren't able to build or own premises. So we were working very much in partnership with Solent to be the sort of the lead builder, or to enable that work with building subcontractors, and for them to be the premises owner of a new premises in Highclere. We had planned permission for that. We then we'd approved the business case. That business case was for NHS capital funding, has to go up into NHS England, and then in some instances up to the Secretary of State as well. That business case has been with the Secretary of State since, I think, December 2021, or with NHS England nationally. We've obviously been going backwards and forwards with them. There was part of a national pause on some NHS capital builds. So we have been pursuing this in the background. Obviously, with the North Harbour closure, Penny Mordaunt, the MP for Portsmouth North, has raised that issue with the Secretary of State to see, can we get that unlocked, and can we get that approval for funding? The challenge that we have as well with all the construction costs and increases, inflationary increases, the building is potentially going to cost more than it did originally. But we are, as an ICB, very committed, and Solent, to continuing that. We believe we need that new premises in the north of the city at the moment to accommodate those additional services. Both Drayton and Portsdown have had interim refurbishments to existing practices, but for Drayton, that's predominantly on the Wootton Street site, and that we're all questioning how sustainable that would be in the future. So we're in discussions with them about continuing to need that Highclere site, and to work with Solent around other provision of community services from that site as well. But we are very much stuck in the hands of NHS England and the Secretary of State at the moment.
That's interesting. I just want to ask two more questions very quickly. One is a clarification of a point. The other one is a question about they're both dentists. Right? On the page 24, it talks about the contracts for dentists. It says 63,000 units of dental treatments. Is a unit of dental treatment anything from a checkup to a full extraction, or are they different? I don't know, because I'm just wondering about what does that actually mean in terms of what you actually get.
Yeah, so they call it. It's the, I guess it's the pricing mechanism of a unit of dental activity, and there will be within that different grades and different prices depending on the complexity of that unit of activity. But broadly, it's how we contract. It's very much a price per item contract with dentistry, but it provides quite a significant increase of activity for us. But there will be different price grades within that.
Okay. And finally, just on the talk about the summit having a working group focused on oral health promotion, and it talks about the others going for a bid for transformation funding to expand the current offer. Where does that bid go to? Is it a bid to the NHS or government? Where does that money come from? It happened since November 22, when apparently they last met.
So the transformation money, I think some of that is Portsmouth City Council money. So that there's, because obviously the provision of oral health strategy, that is a local authority responsibility. So some of that funding will be through the local authority, so Portsmouth City Council, for example, but we are also looking at how we can access other pots of funding, potentially from NHS transformation sources as well.
Okay, right, I'll stop there and let someone else question.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Joe. I just wondered if it would be unfair for me to push a bit more about the John Pound Medical Centre issue, because I had this to bring up anyway. Is the hold-up around the organisation mentioned in your para 1 of your report in relation to the medical centre? Because I got like Councillor Hina, I got the process, but it's just the frustration about why it's taking so long.
I'm not sure what you mean by paragraph.
So under your section about the Island City Practice and John Pound's Medical Centre, the first paragraph says that there are challenges with North Harbour Medical Group. Is that really what the hold-up is, to be more sort of explicit?
So I think from an ICB perspective, our capacity to do the work with the residents in Portsea has definitely been delayed as a result of the North Harbour medical transfer. That's taken most of my team, which is quite a small team that manages primary care sort of services and the contracts, a good, well, probably 4 months. So from November up until the end of last week, they've pretty much been doing that full scale in terms of managing that transfer, making sure it happened safely, making sure we did the right level of patient consultation, etc. So from our team's ability to do the consultation work that we think we need to do down in to support the John Pounds and down in Portsea, we haven't had the capacity over the last 4 months to do that. The North Harbour Medical Group issue hasn't impacted on the lease conversations. But I suppose what I was trying to say from an ICB perspective, our ability to support those conversations, support the practice, work with the council to move it forward, and if we could, have been limited. But the work on the lease for John Pounds is very much with the council and the practice, and I think it's with the council and property services in resolving some of the outstanding issues in relation to the current lease, and then the valuation of the new lease that has caused some of the delays around that.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Agate.
Thank you, Chair. As a for 25 years a Portsea resident until I got married and moved out, I would add my entreaties to that one if there's any area in Portsmouth that is in need of that, then Portsea is definitely it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had some more actually. Is that okay?
Go on, Mark.
Is that okay? Yeah, it's in relation to the pharmacy and dentistry part. With the 4 new additional NHS contracts, do you get feedback from them about why they've now decided to be able to have the contract? So that is there learning there, or is it just what's made it happen this time but not before?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. I'm not sure that we have looked at it in quite that way, if I'm honest. How dental provision and dental contracting works is that NHS England will go out to tender. They'll run a procurement for additional slots. I think what we have done this time, and perhaps didn't happen the previous time, we were very specific about where we wanted those services to go out, which areas. And prior to that, but you're right, when this happened, I think just pre-COVID, there wasn't as much interest in the procurement or the uptake of lots for Portsmouth area. And that has been a change, which is really good news. And as a consequence, we did end up with some provision for Portsmouth residents being actually provided in Andover and other parts of Hampshire, which, as we know, we've all sort of anticipated against. But I don't know that we have actually done the work to say what was different now to 3 years ago, but I could certainly ask that question of NHS England colleagues if that would be helpful. Interestingly, we didn't have as much interest in the Isle of Wight, so that we've had to go back to the drawing board for that procurement, because we didn't get any take up on the lots for the island. So we're doing that work now as well. And
it's slightly a follow up. Sorry to just jump. Do you know the 4 areas where they are? Perhaps I should know, but I don't know in these new contracts.
So we're just waiting to be able to release the full details with the new providers. So we're getting to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. Oh, Councillor Agate.
Thank you, Chair. I was quite happy to answer that question myself. My dentist, who was in Osborne Road at Southsea, one time was actually chair of the dental association, whatever, in the area, who decided when I became 65, and same with all these 65-year-old patients, went on to NHS until about 6 months ago, when he'd moved on, and the dental surgery decided it's not enough money. We don't want you anymore unless you're prepared to pay a considerable amount of money. Does that answer your question, Mark?
I think I knew that bit.
Mark, you've still got your hand up. Have you got another question?
Yeah, I have actually. I just wondered whether there's any under systems pressure. It mentions about the high levels of COVID in December and other respiratory illnesses contributing to the demand. I just wondered whether long COVID has had any sort of impact on that, or are long COVID symptoms pulled out separately, or is that work not being done at all?
Yeah, no, we do look at long COVID separately, very separately, because the sort of, I guess, the impact of long COVID on those people can be very varied. So things like fatigue, as well as breathlessness problems and other areas, they can be really quite varied. So there's a whole work stream understanding that and what provision we can support people with. Some of it is around mobility as well. The respiratory, obviously, particularly in December, there was the strep A as well. So yeah, we look at all of those things in detail, and flu as well. We continue to look at flu as well.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Councillor Holder, would you... Oh,
I think Graham,
sorry.
the last minute hand from Graham.
Yeah, no, the hand gets delayed putting out. You press it, it comes up. I just wanted to ask a question about on page 26. You talked about the using money for our social care discharge fund and using capacity in a Portsmouth City Council owned care home. I just wonder which one that was. Is it Shearwater?
Yes, it's Shearwater. Yeah.
Oh, right.
But we have also purchased more block beds in some of the other private care homes. But so Penny may want to comment more on Shearwater, but at the moment we are using the City Council has entered into a relationship with the Hospitals Trust to manage more the 16 beds that are on the top floor of Shearwater for the hospital to support those beds and provide care for those patients who can come out of the acute but are still under the care of QA, so reducing some of the pressure up at the hospital. And that's just a very short-term period because it's short-term funding, but that's ongoing until the end of March and is proving quite a successful partnership and use of the beds there. So I'm sure Penny may want to talk to you more about that, but it's a short-term initiative which has been going quite well.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I think that's it. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Holder. Do you want me to come back next time specifically with the John Pounds? Is that I can meet with Councillor Mellor and Councillor Corkery in the interim, but you'd like a formal report?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to have an update on what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Next, we'll go to what was agenda item 5, the Portsmouth Hospitals University NHS Trust Acute Services. Penny, thank you for waiting. Would you like to give us a brief update?
Yeah, excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Penny Emmerich. I'm Chief Exec at Portsmouth Hospitals. This is just a brief update paper, but I'll just take you through a few of the key things. And really what this is doing is just updating you on a partnership that we've had in place for some time now with the Isle of Wight Trust. And even preceding that formal partnership in 2020, you'll be aware that we treat a number of island residents here at Portsmouth Hospitals and provide services on the island already as well. But back in 2020, we did formalise that partnership around our acute services, and we published a clinical services strategy that acknowledged the challenges of delivering services to an island population. And the Isle of Wight Trust themselves had already said that they recognised they needed partnerships on the mainland in order to support them in providing services to their residents. You've heard about Fusion already today. That's one of those around community mental health. This is the example around acute services. And so that was about how do we work better together to improve the delivery of services for island residents. And although the timing of that clinical services strategy was just as we were about to go into the COVID pandemic, we have made progress in a number of clinical areas that are outlined in the paper, so stroke, cardiology, urology. But we have got to the stage where we recognise that in order to deliver the scale of improvement that will be needed in order to secure those services, we need to move to a point where we're taking the next logical step where you've got people who can act over both organisations. So really, this is about giving our clinical leads the authority to act over both organisations and redesign services, single service, delivered in 2 locations, and to do that we're moving to a single executive team across both organisations as well. Just to be really clear though, both organisations do remain as separate statutory organisations with their own boards. This is about the alignment of the strategic leadership, both executive and clinical, in order that we can make further progress in terms of the things we set out to do in 2020. So that's a brief update. Happy to take any questions and probably bring you a further update when there's more things specifically to talk about at that time, Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Penny. Members, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. It was just out of interest, really. Does that actually cost more or less? And has that been any part of the driver?
So one of the drivers there are two drivers really for the partnership. We would describe it as clinical and financial sustainability. Money, though, is not the driver for bringing the two leadership teams together. The financial challenges on the island are largely drawn from the fact that the scale of services you deliver on the island are smaller than you would normally deliver for a different sized population. So it costs you more per head of population. And also the Isle of Wight Trust pay significant amounts of money in temporary workforce because of the challenges of getting staff to the island as well. So while we expect that there may be financial improvements bringing some of the services together, particularly actually some of our corporate support services, we are making sure that we maintain the right level of oversight, both at a strategic level in bringing these leaders together, but also making sure that we still run both of the sites very, very effectively as well. But we do have to balance both the clinical and the financial drivers around this.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Penny? No? No, I think a short one for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's the end of the meeting. That's the last item on the agenda. If you could all keep your cameras on and behave while Anna switches off the live feed. Anna?
I can't switch it off now.
Don't know whether anyone's up for election this year, but good luck if you are. And hopefully see you next year.
Yeah. Joe, there's a couple of items. One is